When I first pulled up to the old lakefront property tucked at the end of Sycamore Drive, I knew I wasn't just stepping into a house. I was stepping into a legacy. The gravel crunched beneath the tires of my U-Haul like it was whispering welcome. My grandfather used to bring me here as a boy, back when the lake shimmered silver in the late afternoon sun, and the woods behind the house still echoed with cicadas and the soft rhythm of jazz playing from his old transistor radio. It had been 27 years since I last stood on that porch, but I remembered every inch of it. The smell of pine, the creak of the floorboards, the way the breeze rolled off the water and curled around your neck like an old friend. I had inherited this land from him, a quiet man, a proud man, one who taught me the value of holding ground even when the world tried to shrink you. I moved in on a Tuesday. The moving truck hadn't even finished unloading when the HOA president showed up, 2 other board members in tow. 3 white faces, all tight with polite concern. She knocked, not with a greeting but with purpose. Her name was Barbara. Pearl earrings, tidy clipboard, the kind of woman who smiled with her lips but never with her eyes. "Hello there," she said, scanning the boxes on my porch. "We were just stopping by to welcome you to the neighborhood." I nodded. "Appreciate that." Then came the shift. There's just a bit of confusion regarding property boundaries. The lakefront, well, it's technically communal, you see, maintained by the HOA. So we'll just need you to sign a few forms acknowledging that. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch. "That lake," I said slowly, "has belonged to my family since 1946. Barbara's smile faltered just a fraction. "Oh, I see. It's just, well, our maps seem to show that section as part of the community zone. The docks, the water access. We assumed it fell under our jurisdiction." I stepped forward and pointed to the edge of the dock that jutted out from my backyard. "That dock. My grandfather built it with his own hands. The land under it, around it, and 50 feet into the water, it's all on the deed. I've got the papers." There was a flicker of something behind Barbara's eyes then. Not surprise. Entitlement. The kind that runs deep, passed down like a family recipe. The other board member, a balding man in a golf shirt, leaned in. "You understand, of course, that this creates a bit of a situation. Several of our members have been using those docks for years." I nodded. "I understand. But usage doesn't create ownership." The meeting ended with awkward smiles and promises to review the matter. But the storm had already begun to brew. Over the next week, I noticed how quickly friendliness turned to frost. Where neighbors once waved, now they stared. My mail arrived late, if at all. One morning, someone left a pamphlet in my mailbox titled "Understanding HOA Rights and Responsibilities." It was passive-aggressive, sure, but it was also telling. This wasn't about property lines. This was about presence. About someone like me, black, confident, unmoved, disrupting the invisible rules of who gets to belong where. What they didn't know was that my grandfather didn't just leave me land. He left me records. Legal surveys. A complete history of the lake's zoning from back when it was split from the larger Trenton estate in the 1940s. Back when black families had to fight tooth and nail to carve out space for themselves in areas where they weren't wanted. He had saved every document, every faded map, every notarized letter from the county clerk's office. I took it all to the town assessor just to be sure. And sure enough, the lakefront, the docks, the water rights, they were mine. Not leased. Not shared. Owned. Outright. No ambiguity. I didn't go to the HOA. I waited. I let them come to me again. And they did. 2 weeks later, they returned, this time with more people, more voices, more pressure. They spoke of safety, of maintenance, of tradition. How the lake had always been for the community. Barbara, ever poised, said, We just think it would be best for everyone if access remained open. You could even be part of the HOA yourself. Help us manage it." I looked her in the eye and said, "My grandfather wasn't invited to your meetings. When the lake flooded in '73 and he offered to build a retention wall, the HOA told him they didn't take external proposals. Now that I own the land, you want cooperation. But cooperation without respect is just another kind of control." Barbara blinked. "Surely you don't think this is personal?" But it was. It always had been. They didn't just want the lake. They wanted to erase the quiet power of its ownership. The audacity of a black man owning what they thought belonged to them. Not by law, but by assumption. That night, I sat on the dock and watched the moonlight dance on the water. I thought of my grandfather, of how he planted trees with my name carved into the trunks, of how he told me, "Boy, land don't lie. People will. Systems will. But the land knows who tends it. You stay rooted." I could feel the weight of that truth in my chest. This wasn't just a dispute over property. This was a generational test. And I would not be moved. Word spread quickly. It always does in places like this. Before long, whispers turned into thinly veiled accusations. A few neighbors, ones I hadn't even met, filed complaints with the HOA about restricted access and unfriendly behavior. One afternoon, as I was trimming hedges near the lake, a woman I didn't recognize slowed her golf cart just enough to throw a glance my way and mutter, "We'll see how long that attitude lasts." They wanted me isolated, cornered. They thought if they leaned hard enough, if they stacked enough meetings, warnings, and veiled threats, I'd eventually cave in and hand over access to the lake. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know the names carved into the soil beneath that dock. They didn't know about my grandfather's hands, how they bled building the retaining wall no one else wanted to fund. They didn't know this wasn't just land. It was memory. It was defiance. It was black endurance stitched into timber and shoreline. A month later, I received a formal letter from the HOA. It was neatly printed on thick ivory paper, full of legal language. They must have copied off some template. It stated that due to increasing tensions and unclear easement access, they were requesting arbitration. Not a court case, just a closed-door meeting between me, their attorney, and the board. I brought a lawyer. She was a black woman, sharp as a razor, with 20 years of property law under her belt and a heart that beat for justice. When we walked into that meeting, I could see the shift in their faces. It wasn't just that I had come prepared. It was that I refused to play the role they had written for me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't desperate. I was grounded. Barbara opened the meeting by reiterating her belief that the lake was always understood to be communal, and that we must honor the traditions of the neighborhood. My lawyer slid a folder across the table. These are certified copies of the original property lines filed with the county, including updates from the 1973 reassessment and a 1988 affidavit reinforcing private ownership of the lakefront and docks. You'll also see that your own HOA bylaws, filed in 1992, explicitly exclude the lakefront from your purview. This isn't an issue of tradition, it's an issue of fact. They tried to pivot, suggested cooperative use, even offered to purchase a portion of the land at a generous price to maintain community harmony. I said no, not because I didn't want peace, but because peace without dignity is just silence in disguise. After that meeting, the HOA backed off, at least officially. But the hostility didn't stop. I found nails in my driveway one morning. My trash cans accidentally knocked over, week after week. Anonymous complaints filed about the unpermitted structure that was my grandfather's dock. One night, someone even spray-painted the words HOA rules on the side of my boat shed. That was the moment I decided to fight louder. I contacted the local paper. Not out of revenge, but clarity. I told them the story of my grandfather, a veteran and carpenter, who built a haven for his family when black men weren't allowed to buy lakefront property in most counties. I showed them the documents, the legacy, the harassment. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Truth doesn't need a villain to shine. The story ran under the title, Man's Inheritance of Lakefront Property Sparks HOA Dispute Rooted in Legacy. It went viral. Suddenly, the narrative shifted. People began writing letters of support. Black families from across the state drove in just to shake my hand and tell me my story felt like their grandfather's story too. A historian reached out and said my grandfather's land was part of a rare, documented cluster of black-owned lakeside properties from the post-war era, an important piece of regional history. She offered to help me get the property listed on a historic preservation registry. I accepted. When the plaque was finally installed near the dock, it read, "This lakefront was built and preserved by the hands of Robert Langston, a man of vision, dignity, and unyielding strength. May his legacy remain undisturbed." Barbara never spoke to me again. The HOA quietly removed me from their mailing lists. I didn't mind. Peace had returned, not because they granted it, but because I reclaimed it. Every morning now, I sit on that dock with a cup of coffee and watch the sun stretch over the water like it's blessing the very land my grandfather once walked. Birds glide low, catching fish near the reeds, and the wind carries stories only the trees remember. Sometimes, children's laughter rings out from the other side of the lake. It no longer stings. Because I know something they don't. I didn't just win a legal battle. I restored something sacred. This story isn't about a lake. Not really. It's about inheritance, the kind that doesn't fit in a will or a deed. It's about knowing who you are when the world tries to tell you otherwise. It's about standing tall in the face of erasure, about reclaiming space not just for yourself, but for those who came before and those who'll come after. Because here's the truth. Black legacy is often hidden, buried under paperwork, bulldozed by policies, renamed by systems. But it endures. Quietly. Patiently. Like roots beneath the soil, waiting for someone to remember. And on the edge of that lake, I remembered.